Zoom. So here we go. Where we left off, we're learning Jewish ethics and values when it comes to fighting against an enemy who seeks to destroy the Jewish people. And it's pertinent to the modern time. And we have been learning Mishnahs and Rambams about, first of all, the power of the king. Because really, when did we as Jews have the opportunity to implement Jewish ethics and values in war? Only when we were sovereign in Israel. When we're living in France, Germany, Persia, you name it. What's the difference with the Jewish ethic of values? We're not running those wars. It's King Philip I and second and third and fourth, King James the first and second and third, King William and all these kings, King Leopold, all these kings. Those are the guys that made decisions on war. What's the difference of our ethics and our values? The only time in history that Jews, until modern Israel, the only time we had the opportunity as Jews to implement and really even study and talk about Jewish values and ethics in war is when we were sovereign in Israel. And that was from the time that Joshua, led us into the land through the Babylonian destruction of the first Beit HaMikdash, first temple. Some put that at the year 586 before the Common Era. And then 70 years later, by God's grace, we return to Eretz Yisrael, time of Ezra, Nehemiah. Again, I hope the coughing won't disturb you too much. And experience shows that when I'm talking for a while and the lungs start expanding from that, the coughing cuts down also. So under Ezra and Nehemiah, we came back approximately the year 516 before the Common Era, and we were there another 700 years or so until the Romans expelled us in the year 135. They destroyed the second Beit HaMikdash Holy Temple in the year 70 of the Common Era, and then we still were in Israel, even after the destruction, for another 65 years. A lot of people think when the Romans destroyed the Beit HaMikdash, we all were expelled. Not so. Rabbi Akeidah and his generation worked with Bar Kokhba 65 years later in the Bar Kokhba rebellion against Rome. And only then was the massive expulsion, 65 years after the fall of the second Beit HaMikdash. So we were there, like, if a generation is about 20 years, we were there 3 more generations. And by the way, even after the expulsion in the year 135 of the Common Era, Jews continued to live in the land of Israel in places like Yavne. The land never was empty of Jews. Even when the Romans expelled us, there were always Jews in the land. We were indigenous. That's the expression they use at the university Middle East studies departments. So we've been learning Jewish values and ethics, but by definition, the focus has been Rambam Mishneh on the period of the Bible and the Talmudic period. Because until 1948, there never otherwise has been a chance to implement Jewish ethics. Now, that's been an interesting paradox, because there were values in the world around us that existed 3,000, 2,000 years ago that don't exist today. Today, you don't really talk about wiping out a people. Okay, the stupid morons on college campuses with the word genocide. Hey, Joe, you can't hide. You're committing genocide. Hey, put in whatever name you like. Hey, whatever, you can't hide. You're committing genocide. They don't know what genocide is. Genocide is what we're supposed to do with Avimelekh. That's genocide. Wipe out a people. It's what Hitler tried to do with us. Wipe out a people. When you're committing genocide, you don't send in humanitarian aid. You're going to wipe out Avimelekh, but while we're murdering you and wiping you off the face of the earth, we're sending you some crackers and peanut butter. I mean, what the heck is that about? So there was an era in biblical times that genocide was not a bad word per se. That's what the world was. Genghis Khan, or as John Kerry pronounced it, Genghis Khan, they committed genocide. what the early Americans did to the Indians, Native Americans, that looks like a genocide. I mean, we don't like to talk about it. We pretty much wiped out the Indians, and then at the end we gave them a couple of casinos. We'll let you live in your little reservations, and you'll have casinos, so you'll all grow up drunk, and we'll destroy you. That's what we did to the Native Americans, and that's what other peoples have done. They wipe out people. That's genocide. In the Torah times, we're commanded to wipe out Amalek. We've been learning this. It's not new. Wipe out the 7 nations of the Canaanites, take the land of Israel. And this is part of what we've been learning. That no longer applied. First of all, it applied only to those 7 nations and the Amalekites. People can get all figurative in their speech and talk about Hamas is Amalek and Hitler was Amalek. We don't know who Amalek was. Amalek is a defined nation. And we don't know. Nobody ever showed on Ancestry.com that Hitler descended from Amalek, because they can't. Likewise, all the Canaanite, the Hittite, the Frizi, the Yavusi, we don't know who they are. So these laws don't apply anymore anyway. But we've learned, because we're not massaging the truth, that was the halakha, and we now understand a little bit, we like it or don't like it, you kind of get the idea why HaKadosh Baruch Hu, God Almighty, ordered us to wipe out these nations when we came to the land of Israel. Because if you don't wipe them out, which we don't do nowadays, you see what happens. I'm not for a moment suggesting that Jewish values today say you should wipe them out. But you see the price. When you don't wipe out the Arabs in Gaza, you see what goes on there. And when you don't wipe out the Arabs in Judea, Samaria, so-called Palestine Authority, that never comes to an end. And when you don't wipe out the Arabs in southern Lebanon, Nasrallah and Hezbollah, that never comes to an end. Now, again, 100 million%, I'm not suggesting we should be wiping them out nowadays. It's a very complicated issue, and you just can't do that. And we can't apply the halakha from 3,000 years ago in that one. We can apply halakha from kashrut or keeping Shabbat 3,000 years later. We do not have authority. No Gedolim would say, no righteous, no leaders of the Torah world would say, you can just go around applying something like that. But you begin to see the rationale that in order to have a land of Israel and sovereignty, if you don't do it, you see what happens. So Kadosh Baruch Hu gave us permission and a command, and we've been learning that. Then we started learning about the kings of Israel. In those days, they did not have democracy. They did not have elections. You had a king, you had monarchies. Shaul, King Saul, then it transferred over to King David and the house of David, and we haven't gotten to it yet. We'll get to it on Tuesday night when we get to the book of Kings, Malachim. There's a division in the kingdom, and you end up with the northern kingdom, the south, but we're kings. And we've been learning with Rambam the power, the unilateral power of the kings. The word tyrant usually is associated with a bad thing, but tyrant could also be a good thing. There are good tyrants and bad. Technically, the term tyrant, unlike dictator, is sort of a value neutral term. Actually, the word tyrant is simply someone who runs a tyranny, which also is actually value neutral. There could be a good tyrant, a bad tyrant. And there were some good kings and some bad kings. And we've been learning over the last 6 months or whatever, the power, the enormous power in going to war. The king had the authority to order the mass mobilization of the population, to draft against their will any males that he wanted. And he could conscribe all of the boys in Israel to go to war. And you did not really have conscientious objectors. They could be killed. Although we also learned in the Torah that people afraid would be dismissed from going to battle because they will melt the hearts of their fellow soldiers. So we don't need them around. We also learned, for example, that we would dismiss from the army anyone in the first year of being married, having just built a house, having just planted a vineyard. So we learned that. But otherwise, the king was the boss. The king could conscribe conscription all the women to be his maids and his handmaidens, and he could take people's lands. And he certainly had, like the American Fifth Amendment takings clause, the power to execute eminent domain and grab any property he wanted and clear out the areas so that his armies could march through. Hey, that's my land. All right, we'll give you some money for it. Like the American Fifth Amendment. Everybody associates the Fifth Amendment with you have the right not to incriminate yourself, but the Fifth Amendment has a few things in it. First thing is you have the right not to incriminate yourself, but it also has the takings clause and the eminent domain. So we learned that about in these past few months. The king could take everything. And where we kind of left off was, okay, we have a broad image of the rules. And that brought us to the last subject, really, before the break, Eretz Yisrael, the land of Israel. And we were learning the land of Israel, not in a political way in the context of today's news media, news reports, although it's applicable. But rather than learning it from a political point of view and political opinions and what for Israel, whatever, we were learning halacha. And the halacha we were learning is the land of Israel we have to fight for, and God forbid have to die for. You can't give up the land of Israel. And in the very last class, I was sharing with you the two mainstream halakhic opinion. The word halacha, for those of you less acquainted, halacha means Jewish law, Judaic law. Halakhic is an adjective of or pertaining to Jewish law, Judaic law. Further definition, Jewish refers to the ethnic part. I'm Jewish, ethnically. Judaic is an adjective referring to the theological aspect of Judaism. So we've been studying Judaic law more than we've been studying Jewish law, if you want to be technical. So in our last class, we went through the Judaic laws of holding the land of Israel and the ban or prohibition against giving up even 1 inch, or in there they would call it 1 centimeter or millimeter. And we learned there are two major schools of thought among the great rabbis. One school of thought says it compares giving up the land of Israel to save lives, otherwise you're not allowed to give it up under any circumstance. But if you feel that you can negotiate a deal with, let's say, Yasser Arafat, we'll give you some land and you promise not to hurt us anymore. No more terrorism. So the question arose, are you allowed to give up a little bit of land of Israel to save lives? Once, an Hebrew term for that is pikuach nefesh, to save lives. And one school of thought says the following: look, you're not allowed to drive on Shabbat, but if the wife goes into labor to have a baby, you get her in the car and you drive to the hospital ad Shabbat, but pikuach nefesh, God forbid, if there's a complication giving birth, like our mother Rachel, on the road to Ephrat near Bethlehem, God forbid somebody would die in childbirth, you don't take a chance, you drive to the hospital, even though it's Shabbat. What if somebody needs to eat on Yom Kippur because of a medical reality? And there's no two ways about it, they must have something. So they're allowed to eat. But they're not allowed to decide that for themselves, unless they're learned in halakha themselves. They're supposed to consult with a rabbi. And then when somebody consults with the rabbi, the Rav, unless he's a medical doctor also, like I'm a lawyer, I'm not a medical doctor, I'm an attorney. I'm a law professor. So I'm also an expert in American secular law. But not, what if instead I were a medical doctor? Then I don't have to consult with medical doctors. I might know enough myself. But most rabbis, myself included, are not medical doctors. We know what's on WebMD. So if a member of my congregation or any congregation goes to the Rav and says, here's my situation, can I eat this Yom Kippur? So the Rav is supposed to contact an expert in the field, namely a doctor. And not just any doctor. You don't call, if the guy's got a gastronomic issue, then you don't call a podiatrist or even a dermatologist. You have to call a man or a woman who's an expert in GI, gastroenterology. And you consult with the expert, and if the expert says, well, Rabbi, honestly, he should eat every day, she should eat every day, but from what you're explaining, I'm not Jewish, but from what you're explaining about your Yom Kippur, tell the person they can go by they should eat right before their Yom Kippur, and they should eat right after the Yom Kippur, and they can go without it for a day. Or just have them drink some water. And the rabbi then interprets what he's heard from the doctor and applies the doctor's medical information to the halakha, and then tells the member of the congregation what the ramifications or what the parameters will be. If the doctor says this person absolutely must eat XYZ, then the rabbi, again, applies his own halakhic knowledge to know how to make that work. So on the subject of giving up territory from Eretz Yisrael to save lives, if you think maybe you could work out a deal with Hamas or Arafat and it'll save lives and you'll give them what they want. So according to one of the two schools of religious theological Judaic thought, we apply the Yom Kippur rule. We can overcome or we can bypass Yom Kippur rules to save a life, but you have to consult an expert. Likewise, you could possibly give up the land of Israel, but first you have to consult an expert. So who's the expert? Generals in the army. And so that rabbinical school says the rabbi has to consult with generals in the Israeli army who would be the equivalent to the GI doctor for a Yom Kippur food thing. And the rabbis add, it must be an active Israeli Defense Force general who's in the field, not a former general who's now a politician. Because once they become politicians, their thinking no longer is about only what's got to be done in the battlefield, but they start thinking about political ramifications. Well, if we do this, then Biden is going to hold up the weapons. A general in the field is not involved with whether Biden is going to hold up weapons. The general in the field tells Netanyahu and Gantz and everybody on the war cabinet, here's the status right now in Rafiah. And in order for us to accomplish what you've told me you want me to do, here's what I need to do. I need to go in, maybe. I need to flatten the place. I need to go in with guns blazing and aerial bombs dropping. That's what I need to do. That's the general. Then the politicians decide, that's what you need to do. We got it. We understand. You don't have the problem we have. We've got to deal with Biden. We have to deal with the European Union. And so maybe we'll do this and maybe we'll do that. And then they've got the hostages. And the general is not even involved in the hostages. The general in the field is basically saying, here's what we are looking at: 4 Hamas battalions and 75 tunnels. And so the rabbis of that first school of thought say, if a question arises to give up the land of Israel, if part of it in return for peace deal, you don't consult with the politicians who are worried about what Macron is going to say, or Rishi Sunak or Biden. You talk to the generals in the field. There has never been a general in the field who really has said Israel should give up land for peace. Every time Israel has given up land for peace, and they never got peace, they only made it worse, it was done by a general who no longer was a general, but by then was a politician. So Israel's 3 disastrous fronts today are in the north, the border with southern Lebanon. Hezbollah runs the place. How did Hezbollah and the Arabs end up with southern Lebanon? General Ehud Barak, as prime minister, gave it away. All right. And then there's the east, the so-called Palestine Authority that Mahmoud Abbas runs. And how did Arafat end up with a Palestine Authority? Because the general, Yitzchak Rabin, having become a politician and a prime minister, gave that away. And then, famously right now, on Israel's southwestern border, you've got Hamas in Gaza. And how did that end up happening? Because a general, but no longer a general, rather another prime minister, Ariel Sharon, gave that up. But when Sharon was a general, he wasn't giving anything up. Neither was Rabin, neither was Barak. So the halakha would be, you don't give up land under that school of thought unless the generals tell you, the generals in the field, active duty, tell you that'll save lives. And then there's the second opinion. And the second opinion is, we don't care what the generals say. We don't care if it's General Rabin or General Barak or General Herzl-Levy or General Motors or General Electric or General Mills. You're not allowed to give up Jewish land. You're not allowed to give up land even to save lives. It's not a Yom Kippur analysis, because if you eat on that Yom Kippur based on the medical determination of the doctor, God willing, next year you'll live to another Yom Kippur, you'll fast. And you'll have many more Yom Kippurs in your lifetime, God willing. And even if you'll have to eat every Yom Kippur, you'll have Yom Kippurs. Sovereignty has built into the definition of sovereignty, pikuach nefesh, people are going to die. You cannot have sovereignty without people dying. This is not just a Jewish thing, but that halakhic opinion is there's no country in the world that has sovereignty without facing the chance of death. America, we weren't looking for anybody to die in the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941. We weren't looking for anybody to die, and bin Laden took down the Twin Towers. Belgium was neutral in World War I. They didn't want to get involved. Germany wanted to march into France. They started World War I. That's why they were hit with those penalties at the end of World War I. And there was no way for the Germans to get into France without marching through Belgium. Belgium said, don't you dare do that. We're neutral. Germans said, so let us march through and we won't hurt you. Just let us use you as a corridor to France. And the Belgians said, we're going to fight to protect our neutrality. And a lot of Belgians died. And that's the way it is. There's no such thing as a country where Ukraine wasn't looking for a war with Putin. There's always someone on one of the borders somewhere who at some point, if not this generation, another, Somalia, Ethiopia, the Tutus and the Houthis, there's always someone looking to kill somebody. If not this generation, the next generation, Saudi Arabia and Yemen, no matter where you look in the world, it's part of sovereignty. Therefore, the notion of giving a part of the land of Israel to save lives, that second school of thought says it doesn't apply. You cannot give up land to save lives because any sovereignty at all will guarantee people are going to die. And we actually see that. And with that, I end this little introduction and review of what we've been learning all these months until now. But we see it. So they gave up Judea, part of Judea, Samaria to Arafat, and they still have Arabs coming in from that side killing Jews. They gave up Gaza, and you see what's in the news. They gave up South Lebanon, and you see what's in the news with Nasrallah and Hezbollah. There's no way around it. So let's go and learn more about this idea of Eretz Yisrael today. Today, it's the natural, again, I'd be teaching it this way, even if there were no war in Gaza, and even if there were no war the last 20 years in Gaza. This is the law. This is what I'm teaching. So here we go. Let's find that. Okay, let's do it this way. For this, we go back to an old story. You all know this story. It's, well, the first part, you'll need to be refreshed. And then as it goes forward, you'll know the story, but you probably never learned it the way you're going to learn it today. Genesis 20, Perek Chaf of Sefer Bereshit. Abraham and Sarah, were journeying through the land. And they were journeying through a section that today is called the Gaza Strip. Then it was Philistia. It was where the Philistines lived, even the early Philistines. There's Gaza, by the way. Actually, you see Gaza's listed. There's Ashkelon. This is all Philistia. And Avraham and Sarah, who primarily would be in places like Hebron, places like that, they hung around Hebron a lot. Other parts, they were traveling. You go on a vacation. Who goes on a vacation to Gaza? There was no Hamas, so it was a nice place to go. Because it was, there's a beach. It's a lovely place. Gaza was a lovely place till the Arabs got their hands on it. So they're in Gaza, and that's the famous encounter with Avimelekh, Melech Gerar. Avimelekh, the king of Gerar in the Philistine land. I have the Hebrew and English up for those of you who know this, but the Hebrew, but I'll mostly, for time factor, I'll mostly read in English. So Abraham journeyed to the region of the Negev and settled in Kadesh and Shur. While he was sojourning in Gerar, that's Gaza, Avram said of Sarah, his wife, she's my sister. She was gorgeous, apparently, and he was terrified, and we learned this in different contexts in a different time. He was concerned to have a strange morality there. they would never commit adultery and sleep with a woman who's married, someone else's married wife. They'd never do that. So what they would do instead is kill the husband, and then she's not attached anymore. So then they would sleep with her. So he was afraid. She's gorgeous. We're traveling in a place where there's no law, and he didn't want to get killed. So he said, she's my sister. So she's not married. So King Avimelekh had Sarah brought to him. God came to Avimelekh, and Sarah is the mother of the Jewish people, our first matriarch. She's so holy. God came to Avimelekh in a dream by night and said, you are going to die because of the woman that you've taken, for she is a married woman. Not only a married woman, not any married woman. She's Sarah Imenu, the matriarch Sarah. Avimelekh had no idea. He thought she's an unmarried sister of that other guy. So Avimelekh had not touched her. They were maybe in bed together, but he had not touched her. For those of you attending our Tuesday night Navi class, it kind of conveys like Palti ben Laish with Michal, that he never touched her. So Avimelekh said, oh Lord, will you slay people even though innocent? Hagoy gam tzadik taharog? Good argument. And God said, himself said, because Avimelekh says, he himself said, she's my sister. And she also said, he's my brother. So when I did this, my heart was blameless. My hands were clean. I took an available woman from my harem. And what's wrong with that? That's the morality here. It's not that terrible. And God said to him in the dream, but it had to be a very vivid dream. Because, you dream. Not every dream, even if you're dreaming that you're talking to God, I mean, I have to tell you, I gained a new insight. I really mean this. I gained a new insight into these things with dreams after I went through some of the things I've gone through in health. Last month, April, I had my thing. I don't want to go into all the details. I probably have shared some of it in some emails. And I was put on a medicine called tramadol, which is a softer narcotic than, let's say, a stronger narcotic. But it's a narcotic. And I was on that for about a week and a half. I had dreams that were different dreams. I hadn't had dreams like that other than when I was getting my lung transplant. The first 2 weeks after my lung transplant, they put me on some intensive mix of narcotics and stuff also. And the dream is a different dream. I dream like you dream. But those are different dreams. Denise said to me, Denise doesn't go home when I'm in the hospital. Denise would stay in the hospital. For 4 months, Denise was in that hospital, sleeping in a chair for 4 months. From March 20th, 2022, when I went for the transplant until I got out July, 3 or 4 times, I insisted she go home, grab an Uber and go home and just get a night's sleep at home. But other than that, Denise was always there. And of course, she's with me when I'm at the hospital. And something different was going on with those dreams. Like, you've been married. For those of you who have been married or are married, and you're near someone in bed and they're having a dream, maybe you hear them going, and then maybe you can tell when it's a bad dream. And that's about it. When I was in those dreams, the vivid dreams on narcotics, I actually spoke coherent words. I actually spoke. I thought that, let's say, a doctor, let's say the lung doctor, the pulmonologist, was at my bedside asking me questions. And I was actually answering his questions articulately in the dream, not but something like, well, I'm beginning to feel a little bit. And she said it really struck her. She said, Dov, who are you talking to? And that's the kind of dream Avimelekh had. A kind of dream, I learned this. A dream where he really, really had this perception that God Almighty is talking to him. He understood it wasn't just a dream. It was a nevuah, a prophecy, even though he's not a prophet. And God said to him in the dream, I knew that you did this with a blameless heart. And so I gave you an assistance. I helped you not sin. Whatever reason you did not touch this woman in bed, you did not have a passion, you were too tired, exhausted, Whatever it was. I gave you a hand, not to sin. That was why I did not let you touch her, even though you might have thought to do. Therefore, restore the man's wife, since he is a prophet. He will intercede for you, praying for you to save your life. If you fail to restore her, know that you shall die, you and all that are yours. Early next morning, Avimelekh called the servants, told them all what had happened, and they were greatly terrified. Avimelekh summoned Avraham and said to him, "What have you done to us? What wrong did I do to you that you should bring such guilt upon me and my kingdom? You've done to me things that ought not to be done." "What then," Avimelekh demanded of Avraham, "was your purpose?" And Avraham said, "Because I thought you guys are lowlifes. I thought surely there's no fear of God in this place, and they'll kill me because of my wife." And so on and so forth. So Avimelekh, this is very important now. Avimelekh took sheep and oxen and male and female slaves and gave them to Avraham. Overnight, he made Avraham one of the richest people in the world. Avraham was a person of modest means. Nothing to talk about, nothing to write home about. Overnight, this was God's miraculous way of leaving Avraham for the rest of his life, no longer needing to earn money in order so that Avraham would have a lifetime to contemplate God, to serve God and contemplate the world, and to reach out to the peoples around him and bring them to God. He no longer had to worry about earning a living. He became incredibly rich. So he took sheep and oxen, male and female slaves, gave them to Avraham, and Avimelekh said, "Here, my land before you, settle wherever you please." And so on and so forth. He said to Sarah, "I herewith give your brother 1,000 pieces of silver. This will serve you as vindication. And you're cleared before everyone." And Avraham reciprocally prayed to Hashem. Hashem healed Avimelekh and his wife and his slave girls, and they all bore children, because God had closed every womb in the household of the king, and that was what happened. Okay, that gives us background to what happened, and now we jump to the next chapter, Genesis 21, Parakavav. There's in between a different story, a different narrative. We won't take out time for it. We continue after the curtain went down. Now the curtain comes up for Act 2, and Vayihi ba'etahi. In time, Avimelekh, he brought his chief of staff of his army, Hilkhot, and he said to Avraham, "God is with you in everything you do. I see it. I see Elokim imcha b'chol asher otah. Therefore swear to me here by God that you will not deal falsely with me or with my kith and kin, with my family, lenini ulenechti. Make me a promise you will not tishkor, sheker. You will not lie to me. You will not defraud me. Not to me. Neched is a grandchild. Not to my grandchildren. Nini, great-grandchild. Promise me like for 4 generations. You and your future generations will deal honestly with me, and let me live in this land, and let my children and grandchildren live in this land. In the same chesed and kindness that I dealt you, made you the richest man in the world, I'm asking you to treat me with that same level of kindness. V'im ha'aretz asher garta ba, and to give me the land, and with the land in which you've sojourned. You were traveling through Gaza, which Avimelekh had no idea, but that's part of the land of Israel, part of the land that God promised the Jewish people. At that point in history, there was not yet a Jewish people. There was only Avraham. God promised Avraham a promised land that would include Gaza, by the way. But my point here is not Gaza. My point is the whole land of Israel was promised. And Avimelekh says, I'm asking you, I'm coming in peace. I gave back your wife. I gave you all this wealth. And now I'm asking you to make a covenant with me that, like, for the next 4 generations at least, you, your grandchildren, your great-grandchildren will deal kindly with my children, my grandchildren, my great-grandchildren, and let us continue to be sovereign in this land. Vayomer Avraham Anochi Yishaveh. And Avraham said, I will make such a vow. I will enter into such a covenant with you. And then it goes on. And Avraham made a covenant. Avram took sheep and oxen and gave them to Avimelekh, and the two of them made a pact. Vayichratu shnehem brit. The word brit or bris, we often use it as a term for circumcision. Actually, the proper term for circumcision is bris milah. Brit milah that's a circumcision, a covenant of the milah. But brit in and of itself is a covenant. It could be anything. The Soviet Union in Hebrew was referred to as Brit Mochso. Namely, a number of Soviet councils entered into a covenant and became a Soviet Union. The United States in Hebrew is called Artzot Habrit, the lands of the covenant. In other words, there were a lot of different colonies, states, that entered into a constitution, and they made a covenant with each other, all in this together, except for during the Civil War. And Avram set 7 ewes of the flock by themselves. Avram set Sheva Kivsorat Son, and that's how they did it. And nowadays, you write up a contract and you give what they refer to in law as a consideration. Sometimes you have witnesses and you have signatures, you have a notary. In those days, you would take animals like a sacrifice. You take 7 of your sheep, and it's another form of consideration. You give up something of value. And Avimelekh said, what's these 7 ewes about? What mean the 7 ewes which you've set apart? Avram said, you are to accept these 7 ewes from me as proof that I dug this well, and it goes on and on. Hence, that place is called Beersheba. The 2 of them swore an oath. When they had concluded the pact, Avimelekh and Hilkhot departed and returned to the land of the Philistines. As I told you, Philistia, Gaza, is the land of the Philistines. And Avram planted a tamarisk at Beersheba, invoked the name of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and Avram resided in the land of the Philistines a long time. Vayagar Avram be'eretz Plishtim yamim rabim. What is the very, very next thing in the Torah? If you're a regular at shul, at least on Rosh Hashanah, it's the Torah reading of the Akeidah, the commandment of God to Avraham to bring his son, his only proper son, the one through Sarah, Yitzchak, Isaac, to be offered at Mount Moriah, Har HaMoriah. The very next thing, you see that? Avram resided in the land of the Philistines a long time. Vayagar Avraham be'eretz Plishtim yamim rabim. And then immediately next, after these things, and then after those things, God tested Avraham. God put Avraham to the test, saying, Abraham, here I am. Take your son, your favorite one, Yitzchak, whom you love, and go to the land of Moriah, El Eretz HaMoriah, and offer him there as a burnt offering on one of the heights that I will point out to you. Kachna et benchat yechidcha asher ahavta et Yitzchak, v'lech lecha al Eretz HaMoriah, ve'aleu sham le'olah, al achat heharim asher omar elecha. And you know the rest of the story, the binding of Isaac, Akeidah. We're not going to read all of it because of time, but you know that story. It was heartbreaking, but Avraham was prepared to do God's will and came ever so close to completing the act. And at the last moment, God sent an angel who stopped him. Avraham, the angel called out, Avram Hineni, I'm here. And the angel said, do not lay your hand on the young man. And next thing you know, Avraham found a ram stuck in the bulrushes, took the ram instead of Yitzchak, offered the ram as a sacrifice. Therefore, on Rosh Hashanah, when we read this portion of the Torah, we also remember the sacrifice of the ram instead of Yitzchak, so we blow from a ram's horn, a shofar, etc., etc., etc. Okay. Let's learn the Rashbam. Rashbam was one of the great Torah commentators. When you start talking about the great Torah commentators, at the top of the list is Rashi, and then there's Ibn Ezra, and 1 or 2 others, the Ramban, Nachmanides, but right up there is Rashbam. And we learn Rashbam sometimes in our Tuesday night class on Navi, when we learn Shmuel Bet, 2 Samuel. And here's a very, very important Rashbam. Here's Rashbam's commentary on all of this. And it's the reason I had to give you background, Avimelekh, and taking Sarah and the whole the whole story, because there are references. We need to know how it all fits together. And I'm going to start in Hebrew, but I'm going to shift to English. Afkan. Achar hadavarim shakarat Avraham brit Avimelekh lo ulanino ulechdo. Rashbam says Abraham had karat brit, had entered into a covenant with Avimelekh, with him, to extend to his children and his grandchildren and his great-grandchildren for 4 generations. Ulanino shel Avraham, and this would extend likewise to 4 generations of Avraham. Avraham and his son, Yitzchak, and the grandson and the great-grandson. V'natan lo sheva kifsot atzon. And as a consideration, to formalize the contract, Avraham gave 7 sheep, offered as a sacrifice. And it doesn't show up in the text that I read to you in the Chumash, but it's part of the Midrash oral tradition. V'chora apo shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu al zot. Hey kuf bet hey HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The Holy One, blessed is He, God. God was incensed with anger over that contract. How dare Avraham, as righteous as he is, make a covenant with the king of the Philistines that for the next 4 generations they may live in the land of Israel as sovereign in Gaza. Shaharei Eretz Plishtim nitan Avraham, because the land of the Philistines, namely Gaza, nitan Avraham, was given by God to Abraham. You ever regift? There's a Seinfeld episode like that, regifting. It's not cool. We all do it. Well, a lot of us do it. I've done it. But you hope to goodness sake that the guy who gave you the original gift that you regift never finds out you took his gift and gave it to someone else as a gift. How dare you regift the land of Israel, even though you're Abraham? God, chara apo, he was furious. He was incensed over this. Shaharei Eretz Plishtim nitan li Avraham, because the land of the Philistines was given by God to Abraham. V'gam b'Yehoshua matilim al arei chameshet sarnei Plishtim goral. And when Joshua ultimately came into the land of Israel and divided up the land, the promised land, among the Jewish nations, the 12 tribes, Joshua divided up the lands that belonged to the 5 Philistine kings of the time. You may remember, again, from Tuesday night class, when we were learning a long time ago in the book of Yoshua and then the book of Shoftim and in Shmuel Aleph, and we learned about the 5 kings of the Philistines, the 5 hemorrhoids, if you remember my reference. I don't want to get into that here now, but you may remember there were the 5 golden hemorrhoids, a whole long story. There were 5 monarchies. The land of the Philistines was divided into 5 sovereignties. And when Yehoshua came to the land of Israel, those 5 sovereign lands were among the greater amount of lands that Yehoshua divided among the 12 tribes. That land will belong to the Jewish people. Those Philistines will be driven out. Bichlal Gavul Yisrael. That will all be part of Israel. V'Hakadosh Baruch Hu Tziva Aleihem Lo Techayek Kol Neshama. And God had taught, we studied this in the book of Deuteronomy, chapter 20, Perek Chaf, that God commanded you have to wipe out Amalek and the 7 nations, and I'm giving you this land as a permanent eternal inheritance. So Rashbam continues, Lachain, then he gets into his next commentary. Elokim Nisad Avram, and therefore God put Abraham to a test. And now I'll just make it a little easier by shifting to English. Maybe I'll go back to Hebrew, but let's just shift it to English for now. God now subjected Abraham to a painful test, something that was bound to cause Abraham intense grief. One of the reasons I like to go with the Hebrew is you get a more accurate read than the translations, but the translation has its own value, especially if I'm here to translate the translation. God subjected Abraham to a painful test, something that was bound to cause him enormous grief. Skip a little bit of that there. In this instance, God, so to speak, indicated to Avraham that he had been foolish to think that he could guarantee Yitzchak's and his descendants' well-being into the future. Let's go back to the Hebrew because it's a little bit different in the Hebrew, and the Hebrew is the original. That's the right one. So, Klomar nitga'ita beven shenatati lecha. God was saying, this is the original. The English is taking it down a step from the actual Rashbam. Rashbam wrote in Hebrew. You don't write in English. God was saying, when he commanded Avraham to take his only son to be slaughtered on Mount Moriah, Mount Zion, that's where the term Zionism comes from. The Har Habayit, the Temple Mount, is also called the Mountain of Zion. God was saying, Nitga'ita, baven shenatati lecha. You became arrogant. You became, Avraham, I'm sorry to say it, you became too full of yourself with the son, Yitzchak, that I finally gave you. Sarah couldn't give birth through age 90, and by God's miracle, I gave her a son. I gave you a son, not Yishmael, through Hagar, the maidservant, but I've given you the son through whom your people will grow and become the Jewish nation. And you got carried away, Avraham. Lichrot berit beinechem uven bneihem, that you suddenly made a covenant between your sons and their sons. So you know what? You're going to use your son and leverage your son for some temporary peace with these Philistines and give up the right to the land of Israel, Gaza, for 4 generations? All right. So tell you what, I'm commanding you to take that son. So now, go take that son whom you used as a basis for this covenant, bring him up and offer him back to me. No more son. And now let's see what good that son was for you after all. You wanted to leverage the miracle I made and gave you a boy to agree in a covenant that you're giving up your right to sovereignty over the land of Israel for 4 generations? Give me back the boy. Now let's see what. And he goes on. Rashbam goes on with this, etc., etc. And he says, do you remember, Rashbam basically is saying, remember how Avraham contracted? He took 7 sheep as an ongoing reminder of the punishment against Avraham for compromising on sovereignty over the land of Israel, even temporarily for 4 generations only. God exacted several punishments against the Jews, Avram's children, descendants, that touched on the number 7. And thus, Rashbam says, we find afterwards, let's say in the time of Shmuel, in the time of the prophet Samuel, the Philistines, again, if you attended Tuesday night class, when we were doing 1 Samuel Shmuel Aleph, the Philistines seized in a battle the Aron Brit Hashem, the covenant of God, the Ark of the Covenant, and they held it 7 months. Why 7 months? Why not 6 months or 5 months or 9 months? To remind the Jews, 7, your forefather made a deal with 7 sheep to compromise on the land of Israel with the Philistines. Now in battle with the Philistines, I've given them success, and they're holding my Ark of the Covenant for 7 months. Katav et Arb et Sheva Kivsot Tatzon. Because what did it say? Tikach miadi. He gave him up 7 sheep. Amarlo HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So God was saying, At natata lo Sheva Kivasot. You, Abraham, gave Avimelekh 7 sheep. Chayecha. Well, let me tell you something. By your life, Shebanav osim Sheva milchamot im banecha v'notzchinotam. What will happen is there will be 7 wars in future times that Philistines will launch against your children. You made a deal with them for peace. They're not going to keep the promise. It's like Hamas, ceasefire. And they're not going to keep the ceasefire. They'll keep the ceasefire until they finish building the next round of underground tunnels and factories to make more mortars and rockets and missiles. And then they'll make another war. and then you'll beat them, but you won't exterminate them because they'll sue for a ceasefire. So you'll have a ceasefire, then you have another war. And they'll take the ceasefire time for more, etc. And it'll go on and on and on and on. Same thing here. You made a promise with the Philistines. You had no right to make that promise. You offered 7 sheep. So I will bring upon the Jewish people, your descendants, 7 wars that the Philistines will launch against them. Davar, and even more than that. Chayecha. Also, by your life, Avraham, you did this. God says, by your life, Shebanav horgim shevat tzedikim mibanecha. I will make it over time that Philistines, the descendants of this king Avimelekh, will kill 7 righteous Jews, righteous Jewish leaders in the course of history. The Eluhain, and these are they. Shimshon, the Philistines will kill Samson. You know the story, and he ended up in a great Philistine temple, and he destroyed the pillars, and the whole temple came down, and he killed thousands, but he also died at their hands. Chafni Upinchas, the 2 sons of the prophet of the Kohen Eli, his sons Chafni and Pinchas died in battle with the Philistines. Shaul, we just recently learned that in our Tuesday night class. King Saul died at the hands of the Philistines. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4. Ushlosh Banav, and 3 of Saul's sons, everybody but Ishbosheth, Jonathan and the other 2, died at battle. So because you use 7 U's, E-W-E, to make a covenant that you are willing to give up Jewish sovereignty over the land of the Philistines, Gaza, I bring upon, for 4 generations, only 4 generations, not forever, I bring upon the Jews, your descendants, all these 7-fold punishments. 7 months of the Ark of the Covenant, 7 wars, 7 righteous people who fall, Davar acher chayecha. And yet another thing, Shebanav machrivim sheva mishkanot, the Eluhain. On top of all of that, I will make it that the Philistines and their descendants will destroy 7 holy places. Ohel Moed, the tent of the meeting, the Gilgal. When Shmuel was the Navi, the prophet of Israel, initially the Mishkan was in Shiloh. That was the first place. It was there for 369 years. And eventually was moved to Gilgal. And the Philistines took that down to Nov, to Shiloh, and then Givon. These all were places where the tabernacle stood. Uvet olamim twin. Davar acher. And then finally, the idea that, well, this is the same one again, the Aaron 7 months. So what we see from all of this is that halakha, not talking politics, not talking modern day Gaza war, but we're learning that halakha, Avraham himself was punished. He's beyond righteous. He's the founder of the Jewish people. He was punished with everything from the Akeidah being forced to come yea close to slaughtering his one and only son for whom he waited a lifetime, Yitzchak. And all these other things came about because he was willing to compromise sovereignty over the land of Israel and make a peace deal. So everything that we've been learning until now, going into tonight, we now continue with this idea of the centrality of the land of Israel. And under Jewish ethics and values of war, turns out there's a very strong idea that we're not allowed to make peace if it entails giving up the land of Israel. You could make peace under other terms. You could agree on a ceasefire. You could agree, we're going to pull out and we're not going to go to war anymore. And you're not going to make war anymore. And you'll give back the hostages. Or if the politicians have no strength, we won't even stand for the hostages. But you can't give up land. If the argument is you need to give up land as part of the peace deal, not. Now we know Hamas, as we get into the modern period, part of the deal is they have to have the land of Israel. It's in their constitution, their founding charter document, the state, the land of Israel cannot exist. And that honestly is why they and the other Arab groups in the Middle East have fomented the rally chant in the West, from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. Because kids in American colleges, they don't know it. They don't know what river, they don't know what sea. They just have marching orders. This is our slogan. And the marching orders and the slogan really comes from the Middle East, from people who were founders of all these different American movements. Their money and their influence, the BDS, the boycott, divest, and the sanction movement, etc., takes their marching orders, were founded from the Middle East. And the policy is, from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. That there is no room for Israel. They never, ever accepted Israel. And they never will. Kuwait, I mean, not Kuwait, let's say United Arab Emirates, or the two or three that have made peace in the Abraham Accords, they've never been on the border of Israel, like Syria and Hamas and Nasrallah and the ones in Judea, Samaria, Arafat. It's never been part of their raison d'etre, their purpose of being, to destroy and eradicate Israel. They're just good Arab Muslims, and they're part of the team. And so when circumstances made it viable for them to join the Abraham Accords and say, oh, forget about it, you could live. So they were willing to do it. But those immediate neighbors, the so-called Palestine Authority under Mahmoud Abbas, their covenant is al-Fatah. Mahmoud Abbas wears a suit. He's no longer dressed like Arafat with the keffiyeh, but he's Fatah. He was Arafat's number 2 in Fatah. And Fatah does not recognize the right of the Jews to the land of Israel. Hamas does not recognize that. And so it's up to the politicians, if they want to sign peace agreements. We've seen what happens, but that's not what our class really is about. What our class is about is that no peace agreement, according to halakha, certainly the second of two schools of thought I discussed at the beginning of class today, not allowed to give up the land of Israel. So we have a few more minutes, and I want to start off, and we'll continue next week, with the halakha about the land of Israel. The halakha about the land of Israel is that I wish more Americans would feel about America, country where I was born, land of my fathers died, land of the Pilgrim's Pride, from every mountainside. I mean, I love America. America's been very good to the Jewish people. Until recently, we've never had an exile anywhere like America. And even at this bad time now, so far, it's nothing like anything we've ever encountered. We don't realize how good we have it. Even now, just yesterday, I'm telling you, I really mean it. Yesterday, I had a medical appointment. So I'm going into the building on Sand Canyon to see the doctor, and I drove, parking lot, walked to the building, and on my mind, I'm not worried. It's a routine medical thing to check up on some stuff related to the usual, and I'm like not obsessed, or because it's just a routine checkup. I'm sort of, as you could see, I'm sort of back in business, but my mind is, okay, I've got to be there in 5 minutes. I'll be in the building, we'll go up the elevator, I'm on time, and I'll sit there, and do I want to mention anything to him? If he asks me how you feeling, I'm feeling great, Baruch Hashem, but if I want to bring something to his, that's what's in my mind. As I'm walking, someone taps me on the back. People normally don't touch, you don't touch other people. It called, I'm wearing the yarmulke, and a guy taps me on the back. So I turn around. I still have 5 minutes to get from the front door up the elevator. Yes. The guy says, God bless you, and God bless your people. And this happens to me. I don't know if this happens to you. In part, it depends on whether you walk around with the yarmulke. If you don't walk around with the yarmulke, how do they know? But I walk around with the yarmulke, and it's Orange County. So like I'm one of 2 people or 3 people in the entire Orange County who wears the yarmulke in the street. Most of the Jews hide, and they put their yarmulkes on in shul, maybe in their homes. I'm one of 2 or 3. The Orthodox rabbis, we wear our yarmulkes. So, it happens to me. It happened to me at DMV when I was renewing my license. So, guy taps, God bless you and God bless your people. So you can't say to a guy like that, leave me alone. I don't want to be late for my doctor. You turn around. Thank you very much. And God bless you. He says, I want you to know something. I pray for your people every single day. I pray for Israel. Don't let those people bother you. Don't give in to them like it's up to me. Don't give in to them. God wants you to have that land. And it's like normally you expect that from an anti-Semite to say, you're not really a loyal American. But this guy takes it for granted. I could be a loyal American, and yet that's my land. God wants you to have that land. And we pray for it, and we're not going to let them take it away from us. And he says, our church, every Sunday, the pastor takes part of the prayer time to recite, we all recite a prayer for the state of Israel. So I want you to know when we talk about America and what's going on now, because the media, you know the old story, if a dog bites a man, it's not news. When a man bites a dog, that's news. When people are screaming and yelling, the media loves that. They're fighting the police and they're disrupting campuses. But when a Christian walks over and says to a Jew, God bless your people, we stand with you, they don't get involved in it. But that's what's going on. It's a very, very good diaspora. It's not where we're going to end up long time permanent. Our permanent place is the land of Israel. Like it or not, that is Jewish history. There's no two ways about that. That is Jewish history. But let's finish up now. I want to just give you that flavor of where we're going next week. Mesekhet Ketubot. This is from Tractate in the Talmud, the Tractate Ketubot, which by and large talks about engaging in writing contracts for marriage. Indeed, years ago, 2-3 years ago, our Thursday night Mishnah class studied the Mishnah Ketubot, all the laws of Ketubah and everything like that. But as with everything in the Talmud, there are places where it goes on tangents and segues. And in folio 110b, Daf Kuf Yud Amud Bet, the Gemara says, Tana Rabbanan, our rabbis taught us, and the Olam Yadur Adam be'Eretz Yisrael, afilu be'ir sheruba go'im. A Jew always should live in the land of Israel, even in a city that is mostly non-Jews, like some Arab town in Galilee. Be'al yadur b'chutz la'aretz v'afilu be'ir sheruba Yisrael. A Jew, for all time, forever, leolam, forever, a Jew better should live in a 99% Arab community in Israel than to live in Borough Park or Crown Heights, Pico Robertson or Fairfax, Flatbush or wherever, West Rogers Park. So how come we're here? We were driven here as part of the exile. For most of us, our grandparents from Russia, Poland, other parts of Eastern Europe, seeking a haven from the Tsar, came across the ocean to the Statue of Liberty and set themselves up in America. Many of the later generations have started moving back to Israel, Aliyah. But that's the ideal. Shekol hador be'eretz Yisrael domeh kamish yesh lo Eloah. Any Jew who lives in Israel, even in a community that's basically non-Jewish, is regarded as someone who has a God, our God. Bechol hador b'chutz la'aretz, and whoever lives outside the land of Israel, even America, domeh kami she'ein lo Eloah, is regarded like someone, like a Jew, who does not have a God. Now, obviously, again, you would say, but wait a second, aren't there Orthodox rabbis? Aren't there Orthodox shuls? Didn't Rav Moshe Feinstein live in New York? Didn't the Lubavitcher Rebbe live in Brooklyn? So, of course, you start with a broad rule, and then you get into exceptions and applications depending on circumstances. But in terms of a broad principle, a broad value, a Jew should live in Israel. And this ties in with the subject of war. You're not allowed to give up land. At most, you would have to consult with generals active in a battle in the field. But it's that kind of thing. There's a centrality to the land of Israel that we forget about, because Israeli political leaders themselves talk about two-state solutions and making deals. And you hear it so often, though we're hearing it less and less, that you begin to get the idea, yeah, for peace, you give up land. We gave land to Arafat, we made deals with Hamas. Actually, not allowed to do it. So much so that if you don't live in Israel, it's like you don't have a God. It quotes the Torah. Torah says in Vayikra Perek Chafei, I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt to give you the land of Canaan, which once you drive them out becomes the land of Israel, to be your God. So they learn from that, when you're in the land of Israel, you are intact with your God. And when you're not in the land of Israel, you're not. One more, and we'll break for the night because of our time frame. Is that possible? The Gemara asks. What are you talking about? You're saying that a Jew, religious Jew with a shul, and if he's living outside Israel, he has no God? Ella lomarlach, the Gemara answers, all right, we overstated it a little bit. We're talking a little bit broadly. Let's be a little bit more clear. Kol hadar b'chutz la'aretz ki'ilu oved avodah zarah. Any Jew who lives outside the land of Israel, it's as though he's worshiping false gods. V'chen b'David hu omer. And we see this in the text in 1 Samuel Shmuel Aleph, when David had to flee because Saul was trying to kill him. At one point, he actually had to flee outside the land of Israel to find protection under anti-Israel countries and kings, since they were at war with Saul. If they perceived that David was an enemy of Saul, they were willing to protect him. And David said, Ki gershuni hayom mehistapech benachal Hashem lemor lechavod Elohim achirim. David had said, as it says, let's see if I can open it up. Does it open? No. Okay. It says, I should not cleave to the land inheritance, saying, go serve other gods. And the Gemara says, what did somebody say to David? You're worshiping false gods? Go worship false gods. But it's explaining and conveying kol hadar b'chutz la'aretz ki'ilu oved avodah zarah. A Jew who lives outside the land of Israel, it's as though he's worshiping false gods, statues and other false gods. So with this, we conclude tonight that the land of Israel is non-negotiable. It was given by God, and any Jew who would presume to give up the land of Israel, Avraham Avinu, our patriarch Abraham, presumed simply to give it up for 4 generations, give up sovereignty, delay sovereignty for 4 generations, and was punished both by having his only son almost taken from him at the Akeidah, at the binding of Isaac, and all these different punishments in units of 7, the deaths of 7 righteous Jewish leaders at the hands of the Philistines, the 7 places where the Mishkan, the tabernacle stood, taken down by the Philistines, the 7 wars that the Philistines won, all was a punishment for Avraham delaying sovereignty over the land of Israel. And in talking about ethics and values, when we go to next class, we further therefore see how we're fighting over something for which there's no compromise. Even Lincoln would not compromise over the South. The South basically said, leave us alone. We want to have slaves, and we want to have states' rights. And you could be anti-slavery, have a good time. Just let us leave. We just want to leave. Shalom Aleichem. We had a nice time. We were part of the country for 100 years or whatever. And we'd like to go. Lincoln wouldn't let them go. And nobody in the North. We went to war. How many Americans died on our side, on the Union? We're not going to let you leave. So if you wouldn't give up an inch of the southern states, how much more so Jews are not allowed to give up an inch of Israel, not negotiations and not nothing. So with that, we end tonight. I'm grateful that you came back and we had a beautiful turnout, and God willing, we'll see you again next time. Lala Tov.